I never expected it to happen like this. One moment, everything was perfect, my life, my family, the man I married, and the next, it all started to unravel. I remember the exact moment it began. I was standing there at our annual family gathering, a birthday celebration for my husband. He was the star of the evening, as always. Everyone in the room adored him. He had this way about him, charming, larger than life, and I was always proud to stand beside him. He made me feel like the luckiest woman alive, back then. We had it all: wealth, power, the perfect house, the kind of family you'd look at and think, that's the dream. He had the career everyone envied, the prestigious friends who were always in the same circles as the CEOs and influencers. And I played the role I was expected to. I was supportive, I attended all the right events, dressed to impress, smiled through all the conversations about investments, stocks, and business. It wasn't always easy, but I loved him. And that was enough, wasn't it? But that night, something shifted. It was subtle at first, so small that it almost didn't register. The birthday dinner was fancy, of course. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with the perfume of the women around. Waiters moved around the room with trays of hors d'oeuvres, and laughter filled the air, as it always did. I stood near the corner, talking to a couple of my husband's colleagues, trying to join in, but I felt off. Like I wasn't quite part of the conversation, like they were all in a world I could never fully belong to. I wasn't anyone's equal in that room. Then it happened. I don't remember what I said. It was probably something about how busy work had been or a comment about how everyone was so dressed up, and I laughed nervously, trying to fill the space. But then I heard it, my husband's laugh. It wasn't a hearty, affectionate laugh like he used to give me when we first met. It wasn't even the kind of laugh you'd expect from a spouse who shares inside jokes with their partner. It was different. The kind of laugh that echoed too loudly in the room, almost as if he was trying to make me the punchline. He laughed, and the entire room went quiet for a second, then everyone joined in. It wasn't cruel, not at first, but it stung. It was a laugh that said, "You're cute, but not quite as sharp as I am." That laugh, that dismissive sound, it hit me like a slap in the face. But no one noticed. They just kept talking, sipping their wine, carrying on with the evening. His eyes met mine for a brief second. There was a glint in them, a kind of superiority, and then he turned his back to me and walked away, as if I'd never been part of the joke. I froze, standing there amidst the clinking glasses and murmured conversations, trying to process it. Was I overreacting? Maybe. I told myself that it was just a joke. It wasn't a big deal. Maybe I had read too much into it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That laugh wasn't just a laugh. It was a message. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure about the life I had built around this man. I'd always known that his ambition came first, that he was driven, sometimes to the point of obsession. But I never questioned it. That was who he was. I'd built my life around supporting him, making sure everything was perfect, taking care of the details. I didn't mind being the quieter, more reserved one in the relationship. I didn't mind giving up my own career for his success. I didn't mind taking a backseat because, well, it was my role. I was proud of it. But that laugh, God, that laugh, felt like the first crack in the foundation. I'd always known that the people around us saw me as his trophy wife. The perfect woman to stand beside him in all the family photos, the one who made him look complete. But was that all I was to him too? Was I just someone to look pretty on his arm while he went off conquering the world? Did he see me as more than that? As I stood there in the corner of the room, pretending to smile and make small talk with the guests, the realization started to settle in. I'd built my entire identity around him, around being the perfect wife, the perfect partner. But now, I didn't even know who I was outside of him, and I was starting to wonder if he even cared to know. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. After all, we had been through so much together, hadn't we? There had been times when I felt like the queen of the world, when he'd made me feel special, when we laughed together at dinner, when he'd surprised me with thoughtful gifts and tender gestures. I thought those moments meant something. But now, every time I looked at him, I wondered if I'd been living in a fantasy. Maybe all those sweet moments had just been part of the image we were both trying to create. An image of the perfect family, the perfect marriage. But that laugh was the moment it all started to feel like a lie. The rest of the night went on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. I kept telling myself that it was just a joke, that I was overthinking things. But when I looked at him, I saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't the love I thought I had, the love I once believed was unbreakable. There was distance, a coldness I hadn't noticed before. That night, as we drove home, I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. I could feel the tension between us, thick and suffocating. He tried to make small talk, but I didn't respond. His voice sounded distant to me, like it was coming from somewhere far away. When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom and climbed into bed, curling up under the covers, hoping that sleep would give me an escape from my thoughts. But sleep didn't come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd let myself disappear into this perfect life we had built. I'd allowed him to define me. I'd allowed myself to be everything he wanted, and in return, he'd made me feel like I was the most important person in his world. Or so I thought. And that laugh in front of everyone, in front of all those people who adored him, told me everything I needed to know. I was nothing more than a joke. A beautiful, well-dressed joke. I don't know when I realized it, but I knew right then that I could never go back to being that woman who lived only for his approval. Something inside me had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. In the days that followed, I tried to push it out of my mind. I told myself that I was just being overly sensitive. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe I was just tired. But deep down, I knew the truth. That laugh had opened my eyes to something I couldn't unsee. It was the first sign of a much deeper issue, one I wasn't ready to face. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. Something was breaking, and I had no idea where it would lead me. The next few days after the dinner were a blur of forced smiles and awkward conversations. My husband, always charming and persuasive, did his best to smooth over the tension. He'd act like nothing had happened, pouring his energy into his usual routine, as though I could just erase the sting of his laugh and go back to being the perfect wife. But I couldn't. I couldn't forget that feeling of being belittled in front of everyone, and I couldn't stop wondering if this had been happening all along. Only now, for the first time, I was truly seeing it. I thought about our relationship constantly. I went through the motions, serving him dinner, sitting through conversations that I now realized I had been tuning out for years. His words, once full of excitement and affection, now sounded hollow to me. He spoke in a way that made it clear he believed his world was the only world that mattered, and I was just a background character. I had always been the supportive wife, the one who made everything look effortless, but now I began to wonder, was I ever anything more than that to him? I started thinking back to the early days of our relationship when things had felt so different. I remembered when we first met, how he'd swept me off my feet with his charm, his confidence, his ambition. He made me feel like I was the center of his universe, and I believed him. I was young, idealistic, and desperate for approval, and he gave it to me in spades. At first, I thought it was love. Maybe it was. But now, as I looked at our life together, I wondered if it had all been an illusion. A carefully crafted performance to maintain an image we both thought we had to uphold. In the beginning, he was attentive. He was always checking in with me, asking how my day went, showing interest in my thoughts. But gradually, that faded. I didn't notice it at first, not until I started paying attention again. He had become so consumed with his work and his status that I felt like I was only there to support him, to be the perfect wife in the background while he pursued his goals. He didn't ask how I was doing anymore. He didn't care about my opinions, unless they aligned with his vision for the future. His career had always been his priority, and I'd accepted that. He was ambitious, driven, and always looking for the next big deal. In the beginning, I admired that about him. I admired his focus, his ability to network, his ability to charm the right people. But slowly, I began to realize that everything revolved around him. I started to feel small, unnoticed, as if I were just a part of the scenery in his grand life. He never saw it, or maybe he did and just didn't care. It wasn't something we ever talked about, not until that night. As I lay awake in bed that night, replaying the events in my mind, I began to piece things together. The more I thought about it, the more I saw the cracks in our relationship, cracks I had been ignoring for years. I had always chalked it up to his success, his need to be the best, to be the most important person in every room. He was the one who commanded attention, who made people laugh, who knew how to work a crowd. And I, as his wife, was just there to look pretty and support him from the sidelines. But that night, when he laughed at me, it was as if the mask had slipped. I saw the truth for the first time. The love I had been holding onto, the admiration I thought he had for me, was all part of the image he had created. I wasn't part of his success. I was just a bystander in it, and that realization hurt more than I could have ever anticipated. I started noticing how he treated me when no one was watching. The little things, how he'd ignore me when we were alone, how he'd make decisions without consulting me, how he would never ask for my opinion unless it suited him. The laugh in front of everyone wasn't the first time he'd made me feel small. It was just the first time I had recognized it for what it was. I thought about the times I had stood by him, silently supporting him as he climbed the corporate ladder. I had given up my own career dreams to stand beside him, to help him get to where he was. I had always told myself that we were a team, that our success was intertwined. But now, I wondered if I had been nothing more than a footnote in his story, a supporting character in his world. He had built his empire on his own, and I had been a passive participant, playing the role of the wife who smiled and nodded in all the right places. As the days passed, I became more introspective, more aware of the subtle ways I had been overlooked in our relationship. My husband had always been the one in the spotlight, and I had learned to accept that. But now, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend that I was okay with being invisible in my own life. It wasn't just the laugh, it was everything leading up to it. His arrogance, his disregard for my needs, his constant need to be the center of attention. I had been so focused on playing the perfect wife that I had forgotten about myself. One afternoon, I was cleaning up in the kitchen when I heard him on the phone in the other room. I didn't mean to overhear, but the conversation caught my attention. He was speaking to his business partner, a man I had met a few times but never really thought much about. As I listened, I realized that their conversation wasn't about business, at least not the kind of business I was familiar with. The words they were using were foreign to me, things like offshore accounts, liabilities, and fudging the numbers. I couldn't make sense of it all, but I knew enough to know that something wasn't right. The more I listened, the more my heart sank. My husband had always been the picture of success, the man who had everything together. But now, I was hearing things that made it clear he had been hiding something from me, something big, something that could ruin everything. I didn't know how to confront him about it. I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding paranoid or insecure. But I couldn't just ignore it, not now. The next few days were tense. I couldn't look at him the same way. Every time I tried to engage with him, my mind kept replaying the conversation I had overheard. I began to feel like I was living in a house of cards, and at any moment, everything could come crashing down. I knew something was wrong, but what was it? And how long had he been hiding it from me? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. I had always trusted him. He was my husband, my partner, the man I had built my life with. But now, I was starting to question everything. Was he the man I thought he was, or had I been blind to the truth all along? The cracks in our relationship were no longer small and hidden. They were wide open, and I could no longer pretend they weren't there. I had always prided myself on being the supportive wife, the one who kept everything running smoothly behind the scenes. But now, I felt like I was drowning in a life that wasn't mine anymore. My husband's success, his career, his empire, none of it mattered if I wasn't a part of it. If I was just a bystander in his story, a prop in his perfect world, then what was I really living for? I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what was really going on with him, and I needed to figure out who I was outside of him before it was too late. The days after my discovery felt like a whirlwind. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything around me was spinning out of control, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly how or why. It was like a slow burn in my chest, something that gnawed at me with every breath. I went through the motions of our daily life, serving him dinner, pretending to be interested in his work, but inside I was unraveling. The truth was out there, but I didn't know how to confront it or him. Every time I looked at him, I saw the cracks, the distance, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, things came to a head. We were attending an important gala, an event he had been hyping up for weeks. His company was sponsoring it, and naturally, he was the center of attention. His charisma filled the room, and as always, I found myself blending into the background. It wasn't the first time I had felt like I didn't belong, but that night it was worse. I didn't even recognize myself in the polished, perfect version of the woman I had become for him. I looked around at all the people gathered, all of them listening to him, laughing at his jokes, admiring him, and I felt like I was suffocating. The laugh from that night from the dinner echoed in my mind again. Every time I tried to participate, to engage, he would smile politely and move on as if I weren't even there. I hated myself for it, for allowing this to happen, for becoming so small, so insignificant in the face of his success, for building my entire world around him, and in the end, finding out that it wasn't even the world I wanted. But I couldn't keep pretending anymore. At some point, I found myself alone in a corner of the event, staring at the glass of champagne in my hand, trying to steady my thoughts. That was when he approached me, looking as polished and charming as ever. He leaned in close, brushing my arm with his lips curling into that signature smile that I used to think was meant for me, but now I knew was just another part of the performance. He kissed my cheek, his breath warm against my skin, and for a moment, I felt the familiar ache in my chest. The ache of love, of wanting him to see me, to need me, but I couldn't pretend anymore. He whispered something about making his rounds, about how he needed to talk to the investors, but I could barely hear him. It was as if everything around us was muffled. I wanted to ask him everything, about the phone call I overheard, about the hidden accounts, about the way he laughed at me that night. But I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough. Not yet. He walked away without a second glance, and for the first time in a long time, I felt invisible, completely invisible. The truth of everything hit me like a freight train. He didn't see me. Not truly, he never had. I was just an accessory, a beautiful woman to stand beside him at events like this to make him look good. I wasn't even a person to him. I was a reflection of his success, nothing more. I watched him disappear into the crowd, his figure swallowed by the sea of well-dressed men and women, and I made a decision. The knot in my stomach had twisted too tightly for me to ignore it anymore. I had to confront him. When the gala finally ended, I wasn't ready to go back to the emptiness of our house. I knew that the conversation we needed to have would change everything. I could feel it in my bones, but I had to do it. For myself. We were in the car on the way home, the silence between us thick. The city lights flickered in the rearview mirror as we drove, but the world outside felt distant, like I was living in some kind of fog. I couldn't look at him anymore, not without seeing the man who had dismissed me, the man who thought he could control me, the man who had used me as a pawn in his game. Finally, I spoke, my voice shaking. "I overheard you, you know." His eyes flicked to me briefly, but he didn't say anything. He kept his hands on the wheel, his knuckles white. "I know about the accounts," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I know about what you've been hiding." He didn't respond, and the silence grew heavier. "Why?" I asked, unable to stop the question from slipping out. "Why did you do this? Why didn't you tell me?" For the first time, I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Fear, guilt, maybe both, but it was quickly replaced by the cold, calculated mask he always wore. He took a deep breath, his gaze straight ahead. "You don't understand," he said, his voice flat. "I've been doing this for us, for our future." "For our future," I repeated, incredulous. "You've been lying to me for years. How is that for our future?" His grip tightened on the steering wheel, and for a moment I thought he might snap. But instead, he just kept driving, his face expressionless. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered under his breath. "I've been working my whole life to build something. You just don't get the pressure I'm under." Something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep letting him control the narrative. I couldn't keep pretending that this was normal. I needed him to understand what he had done to me, to us. I needed him to see me for the first time in years, to realize that I wasn't just some accessory, some trophy wife who stood by while he destroyed everything. "No," I said firmly, turning to face him. "I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been so obsessed with yourself and your empire that you've lost sight of what really matters. I've been standing here, quietly supporting you, giving up everything for you, while you've been hiding things from me, treating me like I don't even exist." His jaw clenched, and I could feel the anger radiating off of him, but I didn't care. I couldn't care anymore. "I'm not your trophy, I'm not your sidekick," I continued, my voice shaking with emotion. "I'm your wife, and I deserve more than this." For a moment, the car was filled with nothing but the hum of the engine. Then, he spoke again, his voice cold and distant. "You think you can just walk away from everything. From this life, you think you can just leave it all behind. Maybe I do, I said, my voice growing steadier. Maybe I'm tired of being the woman behind the man. Maybe I'm tired of pretending I'm okay with being invisible. I saw him glance at me, his eyes hardening. You don't know what you're talking about. Maybe I don't, I said, my heart pounding. But I'm done being part of your show. I want more than this. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. We were almost home, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I had said it. I had finally said the words I had been too afraid to speak for so long, and I could see the cracks in his expression, the fear in his eyes. He knew it too. As we pulled into the driveway, I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this was the beginning of the end or just another moment in our endless cycle of pretending. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom, a sense of relief. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his validation. I needed to find myself again. And whatever happened next, I wasn't going to lose that. The night after our confrontation felt like a turning point, but I didn't know if it was for the better or worse. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in the silence of our massive bedroom, the weight of the decision I had made still pressing on my chest. There was no going back now, and that terrified me. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, my words, his words, the way his face hardened when I told him I was done being invisible. I didn't know what had gotten into me, but I couldn't deny the truth anymore. The truth that I had been living in a gilded cage for years, thinking I had everything when in reality, I had nothing that truly mattered. I had let him take over my life, my dreams, my identity. I had let him control everything, and somewhere along the way, I lost myself. The next morning, there was an unsettling calm between us. He tried to act like everything was fine, just like he always did. But I could tell something had changed in him. He was trying to maintain the facade, but the tension was palpable. It wasn't just the silent treatment. It was like he was walking on eggshells around me, like he wasn't sure how to handle me anymore. And I wasn't sure how to handle him either. The man I thought I knew had become a stranger in the blink of an eye, and it felt like I was seeing him for the first time, truly seeing him. I avoided eye contact as much as I could. I didn't want to have another conversation where we pretended nothing had happened. But I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to break, to fall back into the role I had always played. The supportive wife who smiled through it all. But I wasn't that woman anymore, and I wasn't going to let him convince me that I was. When he left for work that morning, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep waiting for him to fix things. He had made his choices, and so had I. The phone call I overheard, the hidden accounts, the way he had dismissed me, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. I couldn't stay in this marriage if it meant losing myself completely. But at the same time, I couldn't leave without knowing the full extent of what was going on. I needed answers. I needed to know everything. I had a decision to make, and I didn't know which way to turn. If I confronted him again, would it only make things worse? Or would it push him to finally tell me the truth? Either way, I knew I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I needed to take control of my own life, regardless of what he did next. I made up my mind. I had to go to his office. If I wanted the truth, I had to face it head-on. I wasn't going to let him hide behind his business deals and his fancy meetings anymore. I had to see it for myself. I didn't tell him I was coming. I just left. As soon as I arrived at his office building, I felt a familiar sense of dread. It was like walking into a lion's den. The marble floors, the sleek, polished walls, the place oozed money and power. I had always been a visitor in this world, but today I wasn't just going to stand in the background. I wasn't just going to smile and nod. I was here for answers. The receptionist greeted me politely, but I could tell she wasn't expecting me. She was used to seeing the polished, perfect version of me, the one who showed up at events, the one who smiled and posed for pictures. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who wasn't afraid to demand the truth. "I need to see my husband," I said, my voice firm, surprising even myself. "Now." She hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure whether to allow me to see him, but I didn't give her a chance to stop me. I walked straight past her, toward the elevator. I wasn't about to play by the rules anymore. I wasn't going to wait for him to decide when I was worthy of his attention. I was going to take control. The elevator ride felt like it took forever. Every second, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Was I doing the right thing, or was I about to destroy everything? When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out into the sleek, modern hallway that led to his office. His assistant was sitting at her desk, typing away, but when she saw me, she looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Matthews, what are you?" "I need to see him," I interrupted. "Now." She tried to stop me, but I was already walking toward the door to his office. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for the handle, but I hesitated for a moment. This wasn't just about confronting him anymore. This was about confronting myself. This was about standing up for who I was and what I wanted. I knocked on the door and pushed it open before he could respond. He was sitting at his desk, looking over some papers, but when he saw me, his expression froze. "What are you doing here?" His voice was cold, but there was something else there too. A flicker of panic, maybe, or fear. "I need to know what's going on," I said, my voice steady, even though my insides were anything but calm. "I need you to tell me everything. No more lies." He stood up, and for a moment, I thought he was going to yell, to tell me to leave, to throw me out. But instead, he just stared at me, his face unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice tight. "Yes, you do," I replied, walking closer to his desk. "I know about the accounts. I know about everything you've been hiding. I need to know why." For the first time, he didn't try to dodge the question. He didn't try to deflect or make excuses. He just stood there, silent, his face a mask of anger and frustration. I could see that he was struggling to maintain control, to keep the upper hand, but for once, it was me who had the power. "I did it for us," he finally said, his voice low. "I did it to protect you, to protect our future." "By lying to me," I said, incredulous. "By hiding things from me, that's how you protect me." "I didn't have a choice," he replied, his voice strained. "The pressure was too much, you wouldn't understand." "I understand perfectly," I shot back. "I understand that you've been so caught up in your own ambition that you've forgotten about the people who matter. You've been so busy trying to protect your image, your success, that you've been destroying everything else." He didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there, his face a mixture of anger and guilt. And for a moment, I thought he was going to break down, that he was going to admit everything. But then, as if a switch flipped, his expression hardened. "You don't get it, do you?" he spat. "You don't get what it's like to be in my shoes, to be constantly under pressure, to have people relying on you." "I get it," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm done being the person who supports you from the sidelines. I'm done being the person who hides in your shadow." For a moment, there was silence. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't recognize myself either. This woman standing in front of him, demanding the truth, taking control of her own life, she wasn't the woman he had married. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who wasn't afraid to fight for herself. And that, I realized, was the beginning of everything. It was the beginning of me taking my life back. The aftermath of that conversation was nothing short of surreal. I walked out of his office, feeling like I had just stepped out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The elevator ride down felt long, like time itself had slowed down to give me a moment to breathe, to process what had just happened. I didn't know what to expect when I walked into his office. I didn't know what I was hopping for, but I sure as hell hadn't expected him to just stand there, stone-faced, barely trying to defend himself. It felt like something had broken between us in that instant, something I couldn't fix, something that was beyond repair. I didn't go home that day. I couldn't. The house felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. I needed space. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I drove aimlessly around the city, the roads blurring beneath me as I tried to put everything into some kind of order in my mind. The truth that had come to light felt like a heavy weight on my chest, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep the lies ran. He had built his empire on manipulation, on deceit, and I had been complicit in it all. I had stood by him, supported him, played the role I thought I was supposed to play. But now I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been just another part of the facade. The perfect wife, the perfect life, the perfect image, all of it was just a show. And I had been the star, too naive to see the strings pulling me along. I found myself parked in front of a small coffee shop on the edge of town, a place I used to visit when I needed a break from the whirlwind of my life. It was quiet, tucked away from the chaos of the city, and as I stepped inside, the warmth of the shop enveloped me. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries filled the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without feeling suffocated. I ordered a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by. The life I had known felt so distant now, like a dream I was slowly waking up from, but waking up wasn't as easy as it seemed. I had been so wrapped up in the illusion of my perfect life, the life I had built with him, that I had forgotten who I was before all of this. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I didn't know who I was anymore. I stayed there for hours, letting my mind drift from one thought to the next. I thought about my family, the ones who had always been there for me, even when I had distanced myself from them to keep up with the image I had created. I thought about my friends, the ones who never judged me, the ones who had always told me I deserved more. And I thought about him, about the man I had loved, the man who had become a stranger to me. What had happened to us? How had we gone from being the perfect couple to this? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing: I couldn't go back. Not to the way things had been, not to the life I had lived, not to him. I knew I needed to leave. I couldn't stay in this marriage, not with the way things had turned out. But leaving wasn't going to be easy. There was so much at stake: our wealth, our reputation, the life we had built. There was a part of me that still felt guilty for even thinking about it. He was my husband. We had shared so much together. But there was a deeper part of me that knew I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for the sake of appearances. As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my heart skipping a beat when I saw his name on the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, but then I realized that I couldn't avoid this. I needed to hear what he had to say. I needed to know where we stood, and I wasn't going to run from this anymore. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello. Where are you?" His voice was tight, like he had been holding his breath. I could tell he was trying to keep his cool, but I could hear the frustration underneath. "We need to talk." "We did talk," I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the anger bubbling up. "And I'm done talking." "Don't say that," he said, his tone softer now, more desperate. "We can fix this, I swear. You don't understand what this is doing to me. I can't lose you." "Can't lose me," I repeated, incredulous. "What about everything you've been hiding from me? What about all the lies?" "I did it to protect us," he said, his voice pleading. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want you to get hurt." "You thought you were doing the right thing?" I scoffed, shaking my head, even though he couldn't see me. "By lying to me, by treating me like I'm some sort of afterthought." He was silent for a moment, and I could hear the sound of him exhaling on the other end of the line. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "You never meant for it to happen," I repeated. "You think I'm just going to forget everything you've done, forget the way you've treated me." "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he said again, "but I'll fix it. I'll make it right." The words sounded hollow now. I didn't believe him. I couldn't, not anymore. He had lied to me for too long, manipulated me, used me to build his empire, and now he wanted me to just forgive him. I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't be. I couldn't keep letting him control me, letting him make decisions for both of us while I just followed along. It was time for me to take control of my own life. "I don't think we can fix this," I said, my voice steady but breaking inside. "I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear his breathing, slow and heavy, like he was trying to figure out what to say next. But there was nothing left to say. The truth had come out, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. "I'm leaving," I said, the words feeling like they were finally freeing me. "I don't know what's going to happen after this, but I can't stay in this marriage. I can't stay in this lie." "Don't say that," he begged. "Please don't go." But it was too late. I had already made up my mind. I had already realized that I had to let go, even if it meant losing everything. I couldn't keep living in a life that wasn't mine. I couldn't keep letting him dictate my worth. I wasn't going to be his puppet anymore. "I'm sorry," I said, and for the first time I meant it. "Goodbye." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling, my chest tight with the weight of what I had just done. But as I sat there, alone in the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that I had taken the first step toward something new, something for me. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. It was like I had stepped into an entirely different world, one where the rules I had followed for so long no longer applied. I had walked away from everything: my husband, my wealth, the life I had once considered my own, and now I was left with nothing but the pieces of who I had been and who I was trying to become. There were moments when I felt relief, moments when I felt like I had finally broken free from the chains I had so willingly tied myself in. But there were also moments of fear, of uncertainty, where I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The first few days were the hardest. I stayed in a small apartment, one I had rented without telling anyone. I hadn't told my family yet, hadn't reached out to friends. I didn't know how to explain what had happened, what had led me to this point. The truth felt too complicated, too messy to put into words, and part of me wondered if anyone would even understand. Would they see me as weak for staying in a marriage that had taken so much from me? Would they judge me for leaving, for breaking up the life I had built? But I couldn't worry about that right now. I had to focus on myself. I had to figure out who I was outside of my marriage, outside of the role I had played for so many years. I had spent so long being what everyone else expected me to be: his wife, his support, the perfect woman who had everything. But I was done with that. I wasn't going to live for someone else's version of who I should be. It was time to figure out who I was, who I wanted to be. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer. It wasn't something I had planned on doing, but I knew it was necessary. I needed to protect myself, my future. I had no idea what my husband would do, how he would react to my leaving, but I couldn't afford to be caught off guard. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just left with nothing once everything was over. The lawyer was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who didn't hesitate to tell me that I needed to prepare for a fight. I wasn't surprised. My husband wasn't the type to let go of something without a struggle, but I was ready for it, ready for whatever he would throw at me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. The lawyer was thorough, explaining all of my options, asking me questions about our assets, our business dealings, everything that could come into play in a divorce. As she spoke, I felt the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. There was so much at stake. Our home, our money, the company he had built, all of it. And even though I knew it wasn't about the money, part of me couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the decision I had made. I had walked away from it all. But I knew I couldn't go back. There was no going back. I spent the next few days trying to make sense of everything. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept racing, going over the same thoughts over and over again. Had I done the right thing? Was I strong enough to see this through? The self-doubt crept in, as it always did when I made a big decision. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stay in a relationship that had made me feel so small, so invisible for so long. I couldn't keep living in a lie. And I couldn't keep pretending that I was happy when I was. So, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, I kept moving forward. Then came the moment I had been dreading, telling my family. I had put it off for as long as I could. I didn't know how to explain it to them, how to justify my actions. They had always seen me as the woman who had it all. The beautiful, successful wife who stood by her husband's side, supporting him through everything. They didn't know the truth about the manipulation, the lies, the way I had lost myself in a marriage that wasn't what it seemed. I called my mother first. She answered on the second ring, her voice light and cheerful, as if nothing was wrong. "Hey, sweetheart, how's everything going?" I hesitated. The words I had rehearsed over and over again in my head suddenly felt like they wouldn't come out. I took a deep breath, forcing the words through my chest. "Mom, I need to tell you something." The tone in my voice must have given it away. Her voice immediately shifted, concern flooding through. "What is it, darling? What's wrong?" I swallowed hard. "I'm leaving him, Mom. I'm getting a divorce." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her processing the words, trying to make sense of what I had just said. "Wait, what? You're what?" "I'm leaving him," I repeated, my voice shaking. "I can't stay in this marriage anymore. It's not what I thought it was. It's not healthy." She was quiet again, and I could feel her trying to hold back the flood of questions she must have had. "Why? What happened?" I could feel the tears starting to build in my eyes, but I pushed them back. I had to do this. I had to tell her. I couldn't keep hiding the truth. "It's been a lie for so long, Mom. I've been living in this perfect little bubble, but it wasn't real. He's been hiding things from me. He's been lying to me about everything. And I can't do it anymore." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. But the business, the house, everything you've built together, what about all of that? I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. I knew she was thinking about the life I was walking away from, the wealth, the success, the security. I had always been the one who had everything, the one who seemed like she had it all together. But the truth was, I had nothing. Not anymore. Not if it meant continuing to live a life that wasn't mine. I don't care about any of that anymore, Mom, I said, my voice steady now. I need to find myself. I need to start over. I need to be free. There was a long pause. I don't understand, she said softly, her voice filled with confusion. But I'll support you, whatever you decide. Just be careful, okay? Her words felt like a balm on a raw wound. I didn't expect her to understand, not right away. But I knew she would come around. My family had always been there for me, even when I made choices they didn't agree with. And I knew they would stand by me now, even if they didn't understand the reasons behind my decision. The conversation ended shortly after that, and I felt both relieved and utterly exhausted. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but another had settled in its place. Telling my mom had been the first step, and now the rest of my family would need to know. But for now, at least, I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. As I put my phone down, I felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, uncertainty, sadness, and even a strange sense of liberation. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure: I was no longer the woman I used to be. I had let go of the past, and now I had to face the future, whatever it held. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on my way to finding the person I had lost along the way. The following weeks passed in a haze of legal meetings, phone calls, and quiet moments where I'd find myself staring out the window, lost in thought. I was still getting used to the quiet. The house felt like a shell without him, without the constant hum of his presence, the feeling that I was always either in his shadow or waiting for his next move. I hadn't realized how much I had come to depend on that dynamic until it was gone. Now, I had to learn to live without it, to learn how to breathe in a world that didn't revolve around his expectations. I didn't speak to him much after our last conversation. He tried calling a few times, leaving messages that ranged from desperate pleas to angry accusations. At first, I wanted to pick up. I wanted to hear him out, to try to fix it, to somehow put everything back together. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. The damage had already been done, and no amount of apologies, no matter how heartfelt or rehearsed, could undo the years of emotional neglect and the betrayal that lay beneath the surface. I knew intellectually that I had made the right choice, but emotionally it was harder to reconcile. There were moments, usually late at night, when I would find myself lying awake in the dark, tears silently soaking my pillow, wondering if I had made a mistake. Had I been too quick to walk away? Had I been too hasty in ending everything, throwing away years of my life, the life I had built? But in those moments of doubt, I'd remind myself that I had left for a reason. I wasn't walking away from the person I had loved, but from the version of him I had created in my mind. The man I thought I knew didn't exist. He was a shadow, a mask, and the truth had finally come to light. Still, it was hard. I had always seen myself as part of a partnership, a team. But what had I really been in our marriage? An accessory? A bystander? There had been love, yes, but it was always overshadowed by his ambition, his need to prove himself, to climb higher, faster, without regard for anything or anyone else. I had been his companion in that climb, but I had never been allowed to lead, never allowed to have a say. I had always been the supportive wife, the one who smiled at the right times, who stood by him when the cameras were on us, who was always poised and perfect. But I wasn't perfect. And I wasn't just there to make him look good. I was a person, and I deserved more than the life I had been given. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I began to feel the weight of the decisions I had made. It wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about claiming my own life again. The lawyer I had hired worked tirelessly, and soon it became clear that he wasn't going to let this go easily. He was angry, hurt, and desperate to keep control. The financial documents, the assets, the company, it all became a battleground. And I found myself, once again, trying to navigate this world I had never really understood. But this time, I wasn't going to shrink back. I was determined to stand my ground. I was going to fight for what was mine, for what I had built, even if it had always been under his name. I remember one particular afternoon, sitting across from my lawyer in her office, going over the documents. There were so many of them, pages and pages of financial statements, business records, personal assets, and I was overwhelmed. But my lawyer was calm, meticulous, making sure that I understood every detail, every nuance, every way my husband had tried to maneuver things to his advantage. "He's not going to make this easy," she said, looking at me with a steady gaze. "But you have every right to everything here. You built this life with him. You're entitled to a share." I nodded, even though part of me felt sick at the thought of taking anything from him. But I knew that it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the penthouse or the company or the fancy car. It was about control. It was about reclaiming what I had lost, my voice, my identity, my sense of self. The divorce was just the beginning. I needed to rebuild, to rediscover who I was and what I wanted for the first time in years. In the days that followed, I made some unexpected decisions. I enrolled in a course to learn something I had always wanted to pursue, something that had been pushed aside for years. I started taking yoga classes, learning to be present with myself, to listen to my body. I even took up painting, something I had always dreamed of but never had the time to do. It was like I was rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten, parts of me that had been buried under the weight of expectations and responsibilities I never asked for. Slowly, I started to feel whole again. Not perfect, not fixed, but alive. I felt like I was emerging from a cocoon, not yet fully formed, but with the potential to be something new. There were moments, of course, when I thought about him. When I remembered the good times, the way he had looked at me in the early days, the way we had shared dreams and hopes for the future. But then I would remember what had happened, what he had done to me, to us. And the love I had once felt for him would fade into something colder, something more distant. The truth had torn down the illusion, and I couldn't put it back together. One afternoon, a month after I had left, I ran into him. It was at a cafe I frequented now. I had no idea he'd be there, and when I saw him standing by the counter, his back turned to me, my heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen me yet. I could have turned around, walked out, pretended I hadn't noticed. But I didn't. I didn't run away anymore. Not from him, not from anything. He turned as I walked past, and for a moment our eyes met. His face softened just slightly, and I saw something there, guilt maybe, regret, but I wasn't sure anymore if it mattered. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice rough. I stopped, just for a moment, not because I wanted to, but because the years of history we shared seemed to pull me in for just a second. I had been expecting anger or confrontation, but his voice held something else, something almost apologetic. "How are you?" he asked, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to gauge what was left of the woman he had once known. I looked at him, really looked at him. I could see the pain in his eyes, the confusion, the regret, but I wasn't going to fall for it anymore. I wasn't going to let his guilt manipulate me into feeling like I owed him anything. "I'm good," I said, my voice steady. "I'm finally starting to figure things out." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I never wanted to hurt you, you know." I swallowed, holding back the bitterness that threatened to rise. "I know," I said quietly, "but you did." There was a long pause, the weight of everything hanging between us. And then he looked away, a sigh escaping his lips. "I wish things had been different," he murmured. "I don't," I said, surprising even myself. "Because if they had been different, I wouldn't have found out who I really am, and I don't think I could ever go back to who I was before." I turned and walked away, not looking back. I didn't need to. I had made peace with my decision. I had made peace with the fact that the life I had known was over. The marriage, the house, the wealth, none of it mattered anymore. I was on my own now, starting fresh, with nothing but the pieces of myself I had found again. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like everything I needed. The past had been painful, yes, but it had also taught me something invaluable, that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else. It wasn't tied to a man, a marriage, or a life that I had been forced to play a part in. I had my own story to tell now, and it was just beginning. I had the rest of my life ahead of me, and this time, it was mine to live.